Alright guys, this is Chatterbox Reviews, coming at you guys with a review for House of the Dragon, Season 1, Episode 4. This one's titled King of the Narrow Sea. Once again, I'm joined by my friend Greg for this review.
Great to be with you.
And so we're looking forward to talking about this one this week. After last week's kind of, really kind of big sequence there to end the episode. A lot of kind of action and that stuff. Seeing Damon coming out at the end, with the crab feeder. So we go from that to this episode, which is a little more slower paced, I would say. I thought it was a little bit more self-contained too. It was whereas last episode was kind of two big events happening, that we had the royal hunt and then of course Damon and the Stepstones. This episode is very kind of self-contained, all taking place in basically just in King's Landing, right? And in like very small
the red keep and
very
the
small
streets, the streets of King's Landing.
Right. Right. The streets as well. Yeah. And just a few characters too. It wasn't like a huge thing with that either. So So having said that, though, I think it definitely still feels necessary. Though it definitely resolved. But again, we were not talking spoilers yet, so I'll be vague. But it resolved a pretty big plot point that has been building thus far throughout the episode with Rhaenyra, throughout the series with Rhaenyra. So I think it was necessary. I think it was also kind of nice to slow down the pace a little bit. We didn't get too much of a time jump between episodes this week, which again was a big difference from last week's, where we got I think 2 years and a bit, right? Or maybe closer to three.
Three.
Yeah. And so this one, so it was kind of nice to slow things down. But those are just kind of my thoughts. Greg, what were your kind of overall thoughts with this one? And also, you want to take us on a brief synopsis, spoiler-free, for this episode?
Sure. Yeah. So basically, like you said, the whole episode takes place in the Red Keep, and then probably about a 15-minute sequence in the streets of King's Landing. So yeah, basically, we get Damon returns to King's Landing. There is this really great sequence, sequence filled with tension when Damon walks into the throne room wearing this crown, which is the titular crown, the King of the Narrow Sea, and we see him kind of walk up to the throne. What's going to happen? Is he going to challenge his brother? And then he says, a line that might indicate some sort of contention. But as we see, then he's welcomed back, and the whole family's back together. It's very nice. It's the whole group, the whole odd group is back together. The best friend and her friend, or rather, the daughter and her best friend, who also happens to be her father's wife, and then her uncle. They're all back together. And then this episode kind of revolves around Rhaenyra kind of rebelling and going with her uncle at night in the streets of King's Landing and experiencing all that has to offer, and just kind of seeing her kind of explore her own sexuality also. And as she's 17, 18 in this, and that's kind of on the forefront of her mind. Without giving away any spoilers, that's kind of the premise here. What I think of the episode, I thought, it feels somewhat reminiscent of kind of episode 2 a little bit. Episode 2, actually, in some ways, it feels like the kind of second half of episode 2. Episode 2 kind of proposes, this idea that the king needs to get married, but simultaneously that Rhaenyra also must get married to secure her future. And we've kind of resolved everything with the king, but now, time is starting to catch up with Rhaenyra here. At the beginning of the episode, actually, I think it's the first scene, we see Rhaenyra with different suitors, trying to, make the best case to be her husband. And we can see that she's gone on this royal tour, as well, and to across the realm to not only meet different lords and ladies and knights, but also to potentially find a match for her. And obviously that doesn't end as the king would wish. She leaves early and then comes back home. But a very probably the most kind of R-rated episode, at least in terms of kind of the intimacy and the sexuality of it all.
And
very much.
the themes kind of that they
The
explore, yeah.
themes, right? Yeah. You know, but yeah, I thought it was good, and I think it sets up a very, very intriguing episode 5 as well.
Yes, and what we've been talking about too with that is that should probably be the last episode for this, for at least Millie Alcock as Rhaenyra, right? Um, and the actress who plays Allison too, right? Will be
Yeah, Emily Carey. Yeah.
right. Will be we'll switch, or at least that's what we're thinking for episode 6. And do we think that we'll see Millie Alcock and like do you think we'll see those actors in the rest of the season at all? Like maybe in some flashback scenes, something like that, or
Uh,
what do you think?
I'm not so sure in the rest of this season. I think it's
Okay.
possible they would come back for flashbacks in season 2. But yeah, to be honest with you, I don't. I think that would be the extent of it. I'm not sure that they would come back in any other capacity other than a flashback here or there, because the whole point of them being in these 5 episodes was to kind of set, create emotional bonds and understand the backstory for what the actual fulcrum of this story is, of the show is, which is this crisis of succession. And we just are kind of, their first 5 episodes were laying the groundwork. I would really doubt we would see them. We would go back to kind of full episodes in this era. I think they're going to kind of wrap this era up. And like I said, you could get a flashback here or there, but I don't think we'll see this level of involvement by these 2 actors, or even a few other select characters.
Right.
I won't spoil. Obviously, having read the book, I won't spoil who may or may not continue, because we'll see a pretty significant time jump. I think probably at least 10 years, or maybe about 10 years actually. So I won't spoil who else might be gone, but it probably won't just be Rhaenyra or rather Millie Alcock and Emily Carey. We're gonna lose probably a couple other characters as well, I would think.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Interesting. Very interesting. So yeah, definitely looking forward to next episode for that and how they'll end that. I think you also mentioned that you watched some cast interviews, and they've all been saying that episode 5 is, or at least some of them have been saying that episode 5 is kind of like the one to watch. Is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah. The sense I'm getting is that it's very much a mid-season finale.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
In terms of obviously I think we'll pick up episode 6, not kind of where we left off. I think quite a few things will have happened off screen, but also in the sense of, I think there are some very dramatic things that will happen in this episode that, I think are going to become as a big shocker to folks that haven't obviously read the book and are just kind of following the show, as it evolves. I think there are going to be some shockers. Do I think it'll be on the level of Red Wedding or Purple Wedding? Well, perhaps not, but it's a wedding in Game of Thrones, in the Game of Thrones universe, so obviously something significant is going to happen.
Right. Right. All right. So yeah, I guess we'll call it there for the non-spoiler section. We'll give a spoiler warning now, so we can get into the episode. But yeah, so definitely just some stuff to keep in mind for next week and going forward with season 1. We're almost halfway through, which is crazy. That it's already been 4 episodes and 5 next week. But yeah. So anyways, so we start this episode. I think you kind of briefly touched on this. Rhaenyra's on this tour, around Westeros to listen to these proposals from potential suitors. And I put both old and young, right? Because we get,
Yep.
I think a man that she said's older than her dad, and then this, young boy who's, very young, very young. Yeah, so we kind of get this idea. Of course, she has no interest in this at all. She cuts the tour short to return back to King's Landing, which then also coincides kind of with Daemon's return. Though I don't think that was planned, obviously, but that is then the scene where Daemon comes down on Caraxes, kind of just lets them know that he's there, right, and kind of knocks the ship. And Rhaenyra actually falls, hits her head, and that whole kind of sequence. So, kind of a nice moment or a nice entrance for Daemon, of course. Very fitting. So yeah, so like you said, he comes home from this victory in the Stepstones. He tells Viserys of this new title that he's been given, the King of the Narrow Sea. But I was actually a little surprised because then he relinquishes the crown and he bends the knee to his brother. And pretty quickly too. There wasn't much, back and forth there. So at least at this point in the episode, which very much changes later on, is he kind of seems to be following the rules for once, and that seems very jovial with Viserys. In the next scene there, they're actually kind of brothers again, which is kind of a nice moment to see. But like I said, this doesn't last too long. But yeah, so I guess what were your kind of thoughts of and it was a bit of a tense episode, tense scene there as well, because we weren't sure what Daemon was going to do. But yeah, what were your thoughts on that kind of sequence that played out there?
I thought they built the tension really well. I think, they've established Daemon as a loose cannon, very much trying to carve his own path. That was basically the whole reason he went to Lord Corlys's aid in the Stepstones, was to carve his own legacy, carve his own identity, and gain some respect. And so, if you were watching this, you're like, well, is he going to try to challenge his brother? Right, you're in front of this entire court of lords and ladies, and Rhaenyra's there and everything. And no, he relinquishes the crown, like you said, and swears fealty to his brother. He says, "Look, we've captured the Stepstones. We've reclaimed the Stepstones in your name."
Right.
And yeah, it's a very nice moment. This moment is all as well followed by this kind of, somewhat of a impromptu party, I guess, where they're kind of in the courtyard, and like that's what I mentioned earlier. The whole family is together there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I thought that was an excellent scene, and I think if they can continue doing that with Daemon, it would be excellent. Just showing that he might pause it, he might come in the room and look like he's going to cut somebody's head off, and then 5 seconds later he is hugging his brother and everything. Or conversely, he may come into a room looking like he's the happiest guy. He's going to give you a hug, and then maybe he'll cut your head off in that situation, which I think is a really cool character.
Right. Yeah. And I think Condal, basically the whole reign. I'm sure George has a part in it too, but they've done such a good job in just 4 episodes, or really 3 episodes, right? Because leading into that scene, of this character of Daemon, and like you said, like he's just has that presence to him that you don't know what he's gonna do in that scene, and that's where the tension comes from there. Which is just really powerful. So yeah, I mean, I can't give them enough credit for that character of Daemon. And I'm sure, of course, obviously that's probably how he's written in the material. So it's, they're just adapting that. But I think Matt Smith then also deserves some credit because he's bringing that to life on the screen, which is just yep. Amazing so far. So yeah, very tense scene there. And like I said, I was actually a bit surprised of how this played out. But it was kind of nice to see, and again, really kind of builds up the rest of the episode then that we get. Okay, so then let's so we do have one scene between Daemon and Rhaenyra before they take to the streets here, which I want to talk about. They're speaking High Valyrian to each other, which I thought of you right when the scene was on. I'm like, Greg will be enjoying this one.
Yep, I did.
Yeah, and so that one I think was kind of more Rhaenyra's kind of expressing that she doesn't like being just a wife to push out babies or whatever for whoever is her husband or her match. And Daemon had a great line there too of saying, that he didn't think that a baby could grow in his wife, even if he wanted to put a baby in her. So, that was kind of a classic Daemon line at this point. So we get that scene, but then basically the next sequence, the big sequence of the episode, is that Daemon gives Rhaenyra these clothes in this bag back in her room when she gets back, and she figures out this entrance to go down. Is that kind of to the crypt, right? Is that where she goes down to there?
I think it's one of those pathways, when in the Game of Thrones when Tyrion flees King's Landing, or rather flees, the Red Keep in King's Landing. That's definitely kind of one of the pathways that was created when the Red Keep was initially built.
Right. Yep. So she goes down there, meets Damon, and so now they go down to the streets of King's Landing, of course disguised, right, so that no one knows who they are. Big part of that I liked is where they're hiding their hair, right, because that's a big telltale sign, that they're Targaryens. So, yeah, and so I thought this scene is just her getting an idea, maybe even for the first time really, of what the common folk are really like. Seeing what they think about her as the heir as well. They're watching this play kind of play out, and seeing
Yep.
them laughing at her being the heir, and all that kind of stuff. And I thought it just looked like she really enjoyed this. She was having fun, just blending in with the crowd and not having this royal treatment that she's always accustomed to. And I think Damon knew that she would like that too. Like they're kind of on the same wavelength actually. And
Hmm.
so yeah, I really like the kind of dynamic there. That yeah, I mean, a lot of other people would like turn up their nose and would never even think about going down to the streets, but it's actually something she quite enjoys. So yeah, any thoughts on kind of her outlook here or her perspective on things here?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think just needed a little bit of freedom. She was getting
Right.
bit of cabin fever, and I think just really wanted to. Clearly, this had never happened before, right? She'd never gone out like this. This is very clearly the first time Damon and her have done anything like this.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, I think also it kind of works as an indicator of the fact that she's now, an adult, and that's how he views her, and so he wants her to have those types of experiences, going out amongst the common folk, having a few drinks and getting into, perhaps some other things that we'll talk about. But yeah, I mean, I thought that it was really good. I think it, very much is. I mean, Rhaenyra was always, in the first three episodes, was always very rebellious and a bit of a loose cannon at times. She's obviously a dragon rider, and she doesn't necessarily adhere to kind of traditional Westerosi customs with women. But I think what we're seeing now is she's very much carving out her own tastes. What she likes to do, and as we see it, very much we explore her kind of sexuality as well, and that kind of aspect of her rebellion, not only speaking out late or doing things that are with some that are somewhat unorthodox for someone in her station, but also now her kind of her desires as well in that sense.
Right. Yep. And so I thought one of my favorite things about this episode was this parallel, to me, that they, and especially in this sequence here, but just to me, the whole episode was really just this parallel between Allison and Rhaenyra. Um, so in this sequence of her being in the streets with Damon, kind of looking kind of happy, kind of having fun, we see these sequences of Allison in the Red Keep. So we get this one scene of her, caring for Viserys in the bathtub, and then later on we get this scene of her trying to go to bed, and Viserys like calls for her to basically to have sex with him in his room. And so we just see these scenes where it's like completely two different lives, right? So these girls were best friends at the beginning of this. Now their paths have gone in completely different ways. Where now Allison is committed to that kind of life, and that's kind of what she wanted, or what she told Rhaenyra that she wanted. I shouldn't say that, not wanted, but she was like willing to kind of go along with the tradition of it. And so that's kind of where she is, and she doesn't look very happy in those scenes. Whereas Rhaenyra is here on the streets of King's Landing, and she's looking very happy and enjoying herself. So I just thought that was such a great parallel, showing those scenes next to each other, and showing kind of the consequences of both of the way that they've kind of went in their lives, two completely different ways here. So do you have any thoughts on kind of the parallels, and is that something that you saw throughout the episode as well?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. We see. I think, obviously Rhaenyra, a common theme with her, a common sentiment that she has or that she shares is that she feels like she can't do anything, that she's like, this kind of very restricted, by her duty. And in this episode, we really see that, in a lot of ways she is, but she also is afforded a lot more she's afforded kind of a lot more freedom just by virtue of not, having these children and being the wife of the king, because Alicent is very much, this is kind of her duty to be the king's wife. Rhaenyra, obviously, it's her duty to be the princess, but at the end of the day, she really doesn't have. She has to, present well during the day, and kind of have that portray that image during the day and at feast. But at night, she can kind of do what she wants, and this is kind of the episode where we see that is in the dark of night she can do what she wants. In the dark of night, Allison has to be with her children, or she has to be with her husband, or she has to obviously have sex with him, and to create more heirs. She never really has any freedom, but Rhaenyra, I mean, absolutely does, especially like as a single woman, and not having her husband to worry about. Yeah, she very much is, I think, realizes that if she plays her cards right, I mean, she can have a lot of freedom and enjoy her life, even if during the day she has to put on a different mask.
Right. And I think something too, the kind of key difference here is that Allison would never like go down to the streets of King's Landing, and I don't think she would enjoy it at all. I think she would, very much turn up her nose to it. And whereas Rhaenyra, does enjoy it. So, yeah, I think it's kind of a fascinating dynamic between the two. Whereas,
Yeah.
and you'd almost think that, they would be the same because, they come Otto, Hightower, her dad is the king, the hand to the king. Rhaenyra is the princess, so they're very, very much, in the same worlds, in the same circle. And so you'd think they would be the same, and by tradition they're supposed to be kind of the same, outlook on that. But yeah, really interesting, and that's why Rhaenyra is such a fascinating character so far as well. And I'm sure we'll definitely see more of that as the season goes on. All right, so with all that being said, then we get to kind of the big pivotal scene of this episode, where we get Daemon and Rhaenyra. They walk into this brothel, kind of the end of the night, and they do say later on in the episode that they've been drinking a lot, which isn't quite evident in this scene, but you can kind of tell. They've had this night out, and now they've come to this brothel. Yeah, and then they find themselves, and I had no idea where this scene was going at all. I mean, they walk into this brothel, I'm thinking, okay, maybe he's there to, like, hook Rhaenyra up with somebody. He's gonna go to somebody. Maybe she's gonna be with a woman or a man. I wasn't sure what was going on, and all of a sudden they start kissing. And I think I told you this, before we started, but I just had such a visceral reaction to this. I was just like chills. I just so uncomfortable, watching this, and so like shocked. Seeing this scene, they come very close to having sex, but we see Daemon kind of starts pulling away suddenly, right? He pulls away a couple times, then he goes back, and then he pulls away, and then he finally does pull away and kind of runs out of the brothel there. But the kind of key thing, though, I think in this scene is that it looks like Rhaenyra wanted it very, very much. Wanted this to happen. She was the one, when he pulled away, that she kept going. So such an interesting dynamic here between these two. Yeah. Well, what were your thoughts? I mean, I guess you maybe saw this coming because you know the material. But still, how was it just watching this on screen playing out?
Yeah, no, I mean, I obviously I knew that at some point something like this would happen. I didn't know exactly if that's how this would resolve.
Okay.
In this instance, but yeah, I mean, I think I share a pretty similar reaction to it. Very uncomfortable. The music is goes very well in concert with the scene, and I think it's directed very adeptly as well. But yeah, I think I think the comment of Daemon, clearly it kind of initiates things, kind of brings her closer. He's talking to her, and then they start sharing, getting intimate, and then Damon's getting into it, and then Ren very aggressively as well, like very much reciprocating what he's doing, which I think kind of certainly catches him off guard, and I think to some extent perhaps even freaks him out, or kind of brings him down to earth, saying, I can't do this. I don't want to to do this to my brother, or, my niece. So I think that's an element of it. I think there's an element of guilt. There's an element of also, I think, um, there's a power dynamic that he likes to have. He likes to always kind of be one step above. He likes to kind of be the aggressor in conversation and battle and in sex. I'm sure. I think that's partially what this was too. Is that as soon as she reacts like she does, he all of a sudden we're on a level playing field, and I don't think he was comfortable with that. But I think obviously, like you had said as well, he had kind of pulled away a little bit during, even prior to that instance. So I think obviously there's a modicum of guilt as well. But I think it's a little bit of both. It's complicated. There's when no person has sort of one feeling when dealing with intimacy like this. There's often several. It's not just kind of a black and white. He felt guilty, or black and white. He was intimidated. There's probably a lot going on in his head at that moment. So.
Right. Yeah, I think that's such an interesting take that I didn't really think about, watching the scene, but that whole kind of power dynamic, and once she kind of, asserts herself and is wanting it as well. I think, that does kind of, I'm not sure that it's 100% of why he pulled away, but I think that does definitely play a part in that, because it almost is like she's innocent at first, and then, maybe when he first starts it, he makes the move, and then that dynamic kind of changes, and then that's when he kind of pulls away, for the, I guess, like the second or third time, the kind of final time that he makes the decision. So now the whole thing of this though is that, and Viserys says this later in the episode, it's all about perception. So it doesn't actually matter really if they had sex in that moment or not. It was the fact that they did this in such a public space where, everyone could see this, or not everyone, but, whoever was in the brothel there. And of course, the little boy who then, goes and tells Otto, which we'll get to in a bit. But, it's just the way that this all happened. If this happened, Daemon comes to a room in the Red Keep, I mean, none of the King's Guard is probably going to say anything if they did see it. And no one knows. The public doesn't know. It's not going to get back to Otto, or probably less likely to. So that's the whole kind of part of this as well. It's not just the moment, but it's how the moment kind of played out, which obviously plays a big part in the rest of the episode. So then I think it's worth talking about. So then that she returns back to her room after this night, being, I guess you could say, turned down by Daemon. Daemon leaves. We got back to her room, and this was pretty obvious. I knew, right when we saw this, Kristen standing at the door, it was pretty obvious where this was going to go, right? Because we see, I'm not even quite sure how to say this, but to me, it just seemed like Rhaenyra was kind of still very much in that mood. I'll just say
Right.
that, right? Like she wanted to, have sex that night, right? Or in that moment. And so it ends up being her and Kristen that end up having sex. Like I said, very differently in her room in private. So this was kind of a romantic scene, definitely, this one. So what do you think of that scene there with Kristen? And this is something we talked about last episode too. I even think we kind of predicted this. We said, like, it'll probably be a next episode if we see something between Kristen and her. We've seen this develop. So yeah, what were your thoughts on kind of that whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think from the start, we there's been something between them, obviously, a mutual attraction, and then even especially with last episode 3, where they basically spend a night together. They spend a lot of time together on this royal hunt. Obviously that brought them closer together. I think it was only a matter of time before it happened. Of course, Kristen was never going to make a move, as he is, very much respects the order of the Kingsguard, and does not want to would not want to initiate anything that would forsake those vows. Of course, when pushed even a little bit, and when somebody else initiates it, he was more than willing to. But yeah, I mean, I knew this was going to happen at some point. I just didn't know exactly when. But yeah, I think it was handled well. I think you really saw, I think even just the way it was helmed, the two scenes where Rhaenyra and Daemon felt kind of chaotic.
Right. Yeah.
Excuse me, like almost the direction of it was the way it was directed and everything it handled was just just shouting, "This is this is wrong. This is weird." Whereas see, with Kristen was a lot more like sensual and
Yeah.
seemed like it's like you said a lot more romantic and it just seemed like a much kind of happier might not be the right word, but much more the direction of the scene obviously led you to believe that this was more a lot more appropriate and felt more right. Just two people who have this really great affection for each other and desire getting together and having this moment. But I thought both were handled well. But you could really see a clear divide in the
Right.
direction of them and the music, how it was all put together technically.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. And the interesting thing about that even is because, like you said, I very much agree that this scene did feel kind of more appropriate, more romantic. But even this scene, I mean, this is also very wrong for a lot of reasons, right? Not in the same way that Damon's scene is, but I mean, Kristen's the king's guard. She's, this is like, having sex out of wedlock, which, huge
Yeah,
kind of no-no as the princess, especially. So there's still a whole host of things that is wrong with this situation. In terms of, I guess, kind of the traditions of Westeros, I suppose you could say. Not so
yeah,
much in that, it's incest versus, not incest. But, yeah, so that is something that I kind of like, you know, thought about as the episode went on. I'm like, yeah, that was like that seemed kind of a better scene or a kind of a better match, but still very wrong in terms of like if this is found out about, I'm sure that Kristen's definitely not in the King's Guard. I mean, would he be killed for this if they found out?
I think almost certainly, yeah.
Probably, right? So yeah, and obviously, no word is spoken about this. So I'm not sure if that will come up later. But okay, so then I guess pretty much just the rest of the episode is basically just the consequences of this night of her with Damon. So of course we see this young boy, which I don't think he actually witnesses it, right? But he just sees that Rhaenyra is coming out of this brothel, kind of chasing after Damon. Or
Yeah,
maybe he does see
yeah.
some
I
of it.
think the implication is that he just sees them leaving the brothel together. But I mean, yeah, it's kind of open for interpretation. I mean, perhaps he found his way in the brothel as well. But yeah, the idea is that he saw them together, and you
Right.
know,
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, and then we see this scene where the young boy comes and tells Otto. I thought this was so reminiscent of Littlefinger in Game of Thrones, right? When he
or
and
Varys.
yeah, yeah, and like when they had the little messengers, the kids as messengers.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was just I thought that was kind of a that's the first thing I thought of. Some great nostalgia there. Um, so I really like this scene between Otto and Viserys when Otto goes to tell Viserys. And I just love the dynamic here because on the surface, both Viserys and Otto are acting a certain way, but I don't know. To me, I knew exactly how both of them were actually thinking. So when Otto comes to tell him, you know that Otto just loves this, right? Like he's just almost salivating at being able to tell him this and deliver this kind of bad news about Damon and Rhaenyra and kind of sowing this divide, which we've seen him do so far. And also Viserys, he in this scene acts like he does not believe it. It's kind of like a preposterous kind of accusation that I was making. But as the next scene plays out, we know that Viserys completely believes it. Because of the way he goes to confront Damon. So I just thought there was so much at play here under the surface with both these characters than what's kind of playing out in the scene. And then, of course, Allison overhears the whole thing play out. But what were your kind of thoughts on that big scene with Otto telling him the news?
I agree. It was very clear off the bat that Otto, he would never make something up.
Yeah,
I think it's fair to say I think he would always want to have at least some basis. But yeah, it's very clear here that he probably overplayed his hand a little bit, probably overreached a little bit,
he
because and probably
and
kind
I
of
just
underestimated
and I
the
just don't
king's
think
response.
he could help himself. Sorry, but right.
Yeah,
So I think that's yeah.
yeah. I mean, we're seeing, even pressure from his brother in I believe it was last episode from where his brother is saying, look, let's get your son, or rather your grandson, on the throne. Let's get somebody with high tower blood on the throne. So this is obviously him trying to expedite that a bit to try to get Rhaenyra, disinherited and stripped of her titles. But we also see, obviously, with Alicent, that also maybe has created a bit of a rift between them as well, because she obviously, a couple scenes later, maybe it's the next scene, seeks out Rhaenyra and says, "Look, did you do this? Like, this ain't good. This is bad." And Rhaenyra obviously, vehemently denies it, or at least that any sort of intercourse took place. And we see there that, Alicent basically takes Rhaenyra's side here. So perhaps now Otto has created a rift between not only him and the king, but also potentially him and his daughter. But yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. He couldn't help himself. This was a prime opportunity, the best opportunity he's had to get his own grandson on the throne, because obviously, if there's any that comes out that the princess has, been quote unquote, spoiled by somebody she's not married to, that would be a massive event. That would be huge. And so he thought this was his chance, but clearly, well, as we especially see by the end of the episode, it does not work out in his favor.
Definitely not. So then, this was my favorite scene of the episode, where Viserys confronts Daemon, who's very clearly extremely hungover still from the night before. Can barely even stand. This and to me again, I was just so shocked by this scene that Viserys goes to confront Daemon here, and not only does David like not deny the accusation, but he doubles down on it, and even asks Varys if he can be wed to Rhaenyra and take her as a second wife. And so I was just so shocked by this, because the truth of it is that nothing did happen. Like you said, there was no intercourse that occurred here. And he could tell Viserys that, even though that doesn't clear everything up. It definitely it clears up that part of it, but no, he doesn't deny it at all, really. Actually, maybe kind of makes Viserys think that he did do it, which of course like that changes later in the episode, but yeah, and then asks Viserys if he can be wed to Rhaenyra. So of course Viserys refuses that, and tells him to return to the Vale and not to come back. He doesn't want to see his face again. So yeah, what a rift we see. At the start of the episode, they're jovial with each other, kind of getting along, and then fast forward about 45 minutes later, and he never wants to see him again. So just a fascinating dynamic between the two brothers here. Yeah, what do you think of this scene, and why do you think Daemon doubled down here and didn't just tell him the truth in this scene?
I think it's a great juxtaposition with the first episode, or with one of the first scenes where they're reminiscing about their childhood and seem to be getting along very well, and then it's like fewer than 24 hours, it's gone sour again, which is, I think, a great, is very emblematic of him as a character, just how volatile he is. Yeah, in terms of why did Daemon not kind of defend himself? I think truly because he desires her. I think he wants this to happen. I think he doesn't see any reason why it shouldn't. I mean, that's very traditional in Targaryen tradition, to marry brothers, sisters, cousins, uncles, and aunts. I think it happens occasionally, sure, if I guess the ages line up for them. So I think he truly just doesn't see it necessarily. I think he doesn't like, Viserys. He doesn't like having accusations constantly thrown at him. This happened in episode 1 with the "air for a day" comment. He clearly doesn't like to be challenged on things, whether they're true or not. And, because maybe he feels like he is, immune to it, like he is kind of above reproach. But yeah, so I think it's probably a little bit of both. And also him just, maybe he does very much lust for her now. Maybe I think you can see throughout the few episodes so far that he does have an affinity for her, and they definitely do have a good rapport, and are very clearly have this chemistry, and perhaps even have a high level of compatibility. So I think it's a few things, but I think genuinely he wouldn't mind marrying her, or taking her as his wife.
Okay, interesting. That's yeah. I didn't see that, but I don't disagree. Now that you say that, I think that definitely does play a part. And I think it even goes beyond just like the sex or the romanticism of it. It's just that the two of them are so well matched. I mean, right? And we see that in the episode. Like
Yeah, and
they,
I think another big thing too is Damon. We've seen it throughout the show. He's very, very much wants to kind of return to this tradition with Targaryens
right,
of both. I mean, especially Viserys is king. He's not a dragon rider. He's not. He's a very docile person, but king by nature. He would Damon wants to return to the fire and blood. He wants to be a conqueror. If there's a war in the Stepstones, they're there within a fortnight. They stomp out any sort of dissent in the Seven Kingdoms, and part of that is he sees that in Rhaenyra. I think he
mm,
sees her, and then obviously not only, maybe then it would also he'd have pure kind of Targaryen Valyrian children, which I think is significant for him. I mean, Daemon and Viserys' parents were siblings, and both dragon riders. I think he just very much he very much kind of romanticizes that element of being a part of House Targaryen. So I think that also has a big role to play in this all.
yeah, yep, yeah, and that's exactly where I was kind of going. Is that I think they are a lot alike in a lot of ways. And you do bring up the conqueror thing. Love that Viserys, say you're no conqueror. I thought that was and it is kind of like almost comedic too, because he's like there laying on the ground, can't even stand up, and he's talking about being this conqueror in this scene, being like Aegon, and Viserys, and even in that scene too, like the way it's set up is Viserys is talking down to him, that the entire scene, 'cause
Yeah,
he's laying on the floor literally. So I thought that was kind of a nice touch there too, the way they kind of frame that scene.
yeah,
Okay,
certainly.
so yeah, so after that one, so you mentioned already the Alicent to Rhaenyra scene. I thought that one was great. And Rhaenyra is being honest with her in that scene to a degree, although she does say that she did not have any sex that night, which we know is a lie. But yeah, beyond that, pretty much truthful to her. And so then Allison, I think, mentions it to Viserys, and then that kind of gets him to go to talk to Rhaenyra, which was another great scene. I'm loving these scenes between Viserys and Rhaenyra. I think Paddy Constantine and Millie Alcock, they just play off each other so well in these scenes. Really gonna miss that. I'm sure Emma Darcy will be great, but I am really gonna miss these scenes between the two of them. So basically, it seems like Viserys in this scene is more willing to believe that nothing actually did happen, or not nothing, but that they didn't have sex, Damon and her. He's kind of more willing to. He's willing to believe Rhaenyra in this, but he says ultimately, like I said a little bit before, it doesn't really matter. It's the perception that matters here, and it's almost too late to go back and fix that. That's kind of out now, right? And so even if it didn't happen, it's still a huge deal. And so as a result of this, he tells her he has to, or he, sorry, she has to marry Laenor, Valerian, Corlys's son, which she does agree to, but basically demands that he do something first about Otto, which we'll get to in a second. But yeah, so basically all this pretty much just solves what we've been leading up to the whole time, in that, who is she going to marry? How is this going to all sort out? And pretty much it was actually almost the most predictable way to go here, is that, yeah, it's going to be Laenor Valerian, because they also bring up kind of the political issues here with Corlys wanting to unite. He wanted to unite with, was it, who? where did he want to go with this? He was going to marry his daughter off to Bravos, somebody, a family from there.
I think that's right. Something. Yeah, somewhere in Essos. I think that was kind of
Okay.
that was his play, I guess, in response to being spurned,
Right.
or his
And
daughter
so
being spurned by Viserys.
right, right. So then this kind of stops that as well. So yeah. Any other thoughts on the scene between Rhaenyra and Viserys, and kind of what the result is here in her marrying Laenor?
Yeah, I would echo what you said. I love the scenes between these two actors. Um, but yeah, I mean, they're two. I think Rhaenyra very much understands now the consequences of her actions, but also I think she never really had anyone else in mind. I think for her, Laner, is he that much different from anyone else, or rather, sorry, is he that much worse than anyone else she's been offered? She didn't have one person in mind. Obviously, she has a strong affection for Kristen Cole. That would never happen. Maybe she has affinity for her uncle. Clearly, her dad does not want that, nor would basically 90% of the realm, and certainly probably 100% of the small council and various other lords, high lords. So, what she left with, Laner, sure, close to home. Driftmark is not that far away from King's Landing. They stay in the family. He's a dragon red. Like, I think just at the end of the day, she realizes this is probably her best match, even if she's not the one who chose it. But also, she very much uses this as as you know, as to then get her own way and get Otto Hightower removed. Her being this kind of amenable to the marriage proposal, like you said, lends her a little bit of credence to then say, look, you can throw weight around me a little bit. Say, look, I'll do my duty here, but you have to do your duty. This guy is throwing around accusations about the royal family, and he's supposed to be your number one aide. Your hand, your the guy you lean on. That we can't have this. And so I think that was also a great show for her of her kind of political acumen and taking out somebody that is very much threatening her position as heir.
Big time, big time for sure. Yep. So yeah. So then we get to the scene, which is kind of the pivotal one at the end. Although I should mention the very last scene of the episode is where Maester Mellos
Melos.
comes in and gives her that tea, to make sure that even if Daemon and her did have sex, that she does not give birth to Daemon's baby, which I thought was a little disturbing, but yeah, I don't know. I thought it was kind of an ominous kind of scene to end off the episode, where it's Rhaenyra gets her way and Viserys removes Otto, but there's kind of this catch of Viserys kind of making sure the consequences of that action don't see the light of day. Okay, so but yeah, before that, then we get the scene where he confronts Otto, calls into question his role in Balon's death, which ultimately made him hand to the king years ago. So of course this was before the start of this show, and then also him deliberately sending Alicent to him in his time of grief. So he's kind of two things here that he's accusing him of, that are pretty serious kind of transgressions as Hand of the King. Now, so this is kind of a question to you. This is kind of a question I had about this particular one, is that him kind of accusing Otto of this kind of malicious intent with sending Alicent to him. I don't know how he didn't see that. Like, I don't know how Viserys didn't even at least cross his mind that, yeah, maybe Otto may have put Alicent up to this, or there was something behind Alicent coming to see him during that time. Is this something that, ever crossed his mind before, or is he, genuinely kind of all putting this together now? What were your kind of thoughts on that?
I think that we hear him say so many times to Daemon and Rhaenyra how loyal and how shrewd and kind of how they hand that Otto is, and he's an honorable man. I think very much this was his moment, his the kind of
Oh,
peel back the curtain moment on Otto, and he clearly has had some time to think this over, and I think very much to connect the dots and got perhaps even a little bit manic about this. I mean, to even accuse him of being involved, or at least if not being involved, certainly celebrating or in some fashion his own father, Viserys' father's death, who is Balon, because that allowed Otto to become Hand. I mean, he's clearly kind of going off the deep end here a little bit with his conspiracies. But yeah, I mean, I think it took this, and I think that makes sense. I mean, clearly this to him seems so salacious and slanderous and just so clearly a move to disinherit Rhaenyra. I mean, a true hand maybe brings this to the attention of the king, but also maybe they don't. Maybe they just make sure it stays quiet and nobody ever hears about this. You know, because I think you can make the argument if Rhaenyra was a boy, right? He probably never brings this to the king because that's just something that kind of happened. But because Rhaenyra could potentially get pregnant, or just because even if she didn't get pregnant, this came out, it would be so much more damaging, not being kind of a virgin before being married than it would be for a man in the same position. To him, this is so transparent, and I think it makes sense. Now he's finally connecting the dots, and enough is enough. But I think clearly this was the straw that broke the camel's back. And I think the other points that Viserys brings up now is just kind of him, becoming a little bit conspiratorial.
okay. Okay. So you kind of took it as prior to this kind of revelation that he was almost had this kind of blind affection for Otto, really, right? And like he could do no wrong. And this is kind of the thing that kind of cracks that open. Is that correct? That's the way you saw that?
Yeah, I mean, I think yeah, for sure, and I think
Okay.
even with the putting the kind of connecting the dots on the Allison thing. I mean, you know, there's no real evidence to suggest that Otto did this. He never saw him doing it. Allison never told him. So even that, yes, it is what happened, but even that is a little bit conspiratorial. I mean, the daughter, I mean, clearly Allison knew Viserys a little bit. Could she not have just had some affection for him? Could she not have just done this out of the kindness of her heart? Which is clearly not obviously the whole story. But all I'm saying is that Viserys doesn't necessarily have overwhelming reason to believe that that is the case, that Otto sent her. But he kind of starts to believe this once he sees Otto being transparently kind of working in his own interests in regards to kind of Rhaenyra and Daemon, that rumor.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, no, I think that adds more context to it. So I think so. Yeah, so then obviously he says he can no longer trust his judgment. Very kind of dramatic thing of him taking the king's hand, like the pin from his chest. Yeah, that was kind of a really kind of intense scene where it's just something like such a small action, but such a big kind of move that Viserys makes there. So yeah, I think there's also to me like what I saw too in this is that Viserys is so because I think even the next scene we see is that he sends the tea to Rhaenyra. So I think there's something in the back of his mind that still believes this, right? Or that there's still a chance that they actually did have sex. And so I think that also plays a part in this scene of him deciding to take the pin away from Otto and basically release him, is that there's something in the back of his mind that this actually did happen, and now it's kind of to compensate for that he's getting rid of Otto, because he's kind of exposed this, right, that he doesn't want this to be real, but he does, part of him still believes it a little bit. So I thought that
Yeah,
was, yeah, so I thought that was kind of at play here as well, where it wasn't just him totally now against Otto. It was also kind of trying to compensate a little bit for that and making this big action. And I think this also obviously it kind of plays up a pretty good perception too, because if it's Otto that broke the news to him, and now they can kind of paint it that Otto started this rumor, and now he's no longer Hand of the King. So it's kind of the optics of this too, I think, that really benefits Viserys and Rhaenyra, as well, to kind of just get Otto out of the picture and kind of, I guess, almost make him kind of the scapegoat, in this as well. So, yeah, you agree with that, or any kind of final thoughts on this whole thing with Otto?
Yeah, I mean, clearly this was kind of a political battle between Rhaenyra and Otto here over this issue, and Rhaenyra won one of Otto's kind of first losses we've seen, and so I think that that was insane, but I think it also shows that Otto, obviously does care about his role, cares about the king. He becomes very emotional. He doesn't react with this great sense of anger. He's very much just disappointed and sad. So I think we see that Otto genuinely does care about the service, and I think clearly he made the move for his own station, but also maybe he has his doubts about Rhaenyra as a ruler. If she's this volatile, maybe she's going to be kind of like a female Daemon. So I think I think both things can be true simultaneously.
Right.
But yes, clearly he wants his own grandson on the throne, because who's likely to be Hand if his grandson's on the throne, right? He's got a pretty good shot. If Rhaenyra is the monarch, I don't think he's going to be Hand. I don't think he's going to be anywhere near small council. So, yeah, I mean, I think both things can be true, but yeah, clearly this move lowered his station quite a bit.
Yeah. Yep. And a great character in you being able to say that, even about, he's not just the conniving, type and in it for himself. I think you're exactly right. I think there is a part of him that is like really quite upset about this, that he enjoys being Hand of the King and serving. So yeah. And obviously he's done it for how many years? How many kings has he been Hand to? I think they said 3. Is that?
Yeah, I believe, well, it might have just been Jaehaerys, and I believe it's just Jaehaerys and Viserys.
Oh, there's the 2. Okay.
Yes, I believe.
Okay. But yeah, so for quite a while. So this is a big change. I'm hoping that we see more of him. I hope this isn't the end of Otto Hightower, 'cause such a great character.
I don't think so.
No? Okay.
No.
And Rhys Ifan is obviously really great too. So, yeah, so we'll have to see where he goes from here. So, anyways, that just about does it for this episode. Then, yeah, I don't know. What are your kind of predictions for next episode? Like we talked about, this is probably the last one for this timeline with Millie Alcock as Rhaenyra. So going to be a big jump into episode 6. But other than that, I think you took a look at the trailer. So what are your thoughts for this next episode?
Well, it looks like we're going to get a wedding episode between Rhaenyra and Laenor Velaryon, rather. So I think that should be interesting. Obviously, Game of Thrones, the world of Game of Thrones, weddings are a big deal, and they tend to have massive consequences. And so we'll see what happens here. I mean, I'm sure there are not a lot of people who are not happy that Rhaenyra is not marrying them or marrying into their family. I think we see the Lannisters walk into the throne room. I think Jason Lannister is clearly not happy that he's not being wed to her. So yeah, there's a lot of things that, like, Daemon is probably not happy. I would assume he's not going to keep his mouth shut at the wedding, at the very least. Looks like knives come out in the trailer, so we'll see what happens. But yeah, I think we're going to get an episode very insulated within the banquet. I mean, we might get the wedding, but it very much looks like it could very much revolve around kind of the banquet, kind of the reception,
right,
of the wedding. But it looks like, yeah, we're gonna get. Looks like we got all our characters under one roof: Daemon, Viserys, Alicent, Otto. I didn't see in the trailer, but who knows? Obviously Rhaenyra, and then Corlys has been away for an episode. Rhaenys has been away for a couple episodes. Looks like we're gonna get her back.
Oh, that's good.
So
yep.
I think sparks will fly. It looks great, though. I'm very excited.
Okay. Yeah, sounds awesome. So yeah, ramping up for a big one next week. should be good. Definitely looking forward to it. But yeah, so thank you guys so much for watching this one. Of course, let us know what you thought of the episode. Down in the comments. Love to discuss this one with you guys. But yeah, so that just about does it for this week. So then we'll see you back next week then for House of the Dragon Season 1, Episode 5.
See you next time.